Now, the International Monetary Fund says global growth will be the strongest since 2011, at 3.9% both this year and next. But there are concerns, not least potential barriers to trade from the United States, China and elsewhere. There was a slight upgrade for UK growth to 1.6% this year. Meanwhile, China's announced its growth during the last quarter was 6.8%, which is, of course, above its 6.5% target. Well, earlier I spoke to the incoming Secretary General of the world's biggest business organisation, the International Chambers of Commerce. I asked John Denton for his view on the outlook for the global economy.
When I look at the state of the world economy, and I almost repeat what Christine Lagarde is saying, I mean, the sun is shining. There's an upswing going on, and it's very, very positive. The challenges we see are how do we maintain that momentum, and what we don't want to see is distractions to that, and we don't want to see inward policy formation, which will actually undermine the prospects for growth. And obviously, for sustained economic growth, it's not just capital, it's not just productivity, but it's also about technological transformation. And we want to see economies focus much more on that aspect, ensuring that that's the source of their economic growth. And that's some issues that need to be fleshed out through the WTO, which actually is the only organisation that can deliver up global norms that will enable the continued growth of the digital platform and also the continued growth of access to e-commerce and things like that, which is very important for SMEs and micro SMEs.
But how worried are you about this apparent kickback against globalisation, the fact that in some Western nations, including the UK, the United States, people seem now to be positively against free movement of capital and labour?
Yeah, well, I think that we're at very uncertain times, but I don't think this issue or this tone of the times must be permanent. I think we have to recognise a couple of things. That firstly, probably the two critical assumptions upon which this unbounded global growth that we saw in the 2000s were based, probably overpromised. And the first was that global trade would actually, on the aggregate, create greater wealth for all. But the reality is that's not how it played out. And the second, that by letting a number of developing countries participate in the kind of global trading system, that they would continue to open up their borders, reduce tariffs, and move away from non-tariff barriers, so behind the border restrictions. Both of these assumptions proved to be a little over-optimistic. But I think some of these systemically important and not quite open economies need to do some reform. And I include China in that. And I include India in that. These are systemically important economies that are benefiting from the open trading system, but they actually do need to do more in terms of reform, particularly in terms of opening up their economies. And this is not necessarily only in tariffs, but in non-tariff barriers as well. So enabling investment, be much clearer about those sorts of issues.
But it sounds from what you're saying, the need for some of these big systemically important countries to open up, that you have some sympathy with Donald Trump in terms of some of the things that he's saying about China.
But the reality is not everything that Donald Trump says is wrong. It's easier for a Chinese to invest in Australia than for Australians to invest in China, and ditto with America. So it's not just about the trade deficit. There is no doubt, and China recognises it itself, that it needs to open up more parts of its economy. There is no doubt, and China knows this itself, that some of the points that America has made are not misplaced. The challenge for them is how do they actually make that work in their own domestic economy.
What do you make of the sanctions that America and some of its allies have just introduced against Russia? Is that not going to push Russia back into a more isolationist position?
We need to have people abide by the rules. We need to have people know that if they break the rules, there are consequences. And in the global security, global political arena, the kind of consequences must be more than just shaming. There actually needs to be some form of pecuniary sanction. And actually denial of access to the US financial services system. The financial system seems to be one of the most powerful tools that's available at the moment. It should, however, only be used very sparingly. And it is a real problem. Unfortunately, the capacity of global leaders to engage in constructive discussions to lessen tensions seems to be sadly missing at the moment. What we're seeing is exacerbated tensions, not just with Russia, but also with China.